Good afternoon and welcome to Iowa News and Views. My name's Joe Balcom. I'm the host of the program. With us this afternoon is State Representative Ed Fallon from Des Moines. Ed's with us to talk about urban growth issues and development and farmland protection in our state and some things going on around the state to address those concerns. But before we get to Ed and have a discussion of those important topics, we're going to hear a little tune from Ed on the accordion to kind of get us in the mood.
In hot weather like this, I think a song entitled Rain, Rain Polka would be appropriate.
Good sound, Ed. It's very nice. Clouds are coming in right now, boys. It's going to start raining any minute. We're sitting in downtown Iowa City this afternoon, and it's a terrific opportunity to talk about some growth issues, not only here in Johnson County, but across the state of Iowa. And many people might not be aware of this, but over the last 50 years, Iowa's lost about 1.3 million acres of farmland to accommodate such things as roads, shopping centers, and residential development. About a fourth of that ground was lost just in the last 5 years. And so we've seen kind of an accelerated growth pattern in the state and in a handful of communities. Ed, why should people in urban areas be concerned about the loss of farmland?
Well, it's a good question because a lot of times you hear farmers concerned about them being able to preserve their livelihood. You hear concerns about the deterioration of the quality of farmland and the loss of farmland, but there's a direct effect on urban residents as well. The obvious effect is that we all eat, and as urban populations continue to grow, farmland declines. We're going to get to a point where we're not going to have enough land to produce the food we need. And one group, American Farmland Trust, a national group that studies this issue, has concluded that by at least at the latest by mid-century, mid-21st century, we'll be in the situation of having to be a net food importer. And I don't know where we're going to import our food from. I mean, we have some of the best farmland in the world, and that's an issue that affects everybody. The other issue is, from an urban point of view, and Des Moines is experiencing this, and Cedar Rapids and other cities will begin to experience a drain of population into the rural areas that are being developed. And that gets, along with that problem is the fact that you no longer have the tax base needed to provide the services that folks want to see provided, and you've also just got a deteriorating housing base. Crime tends to increase. Poverty tends to be concentrated in the core city. In Polk County, for example, 83% of all the people who live below the poverty line in the county live in Des Moines, even though Des Moines is less than 50% of the population. Those trends will continue to be exacerbated as this type of development continues.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know here in Johnson County we've had about, during the 1980s, we've had about 18% population growth, and there's been a substantial increase in development in some of the small communities around Johnson County as well as Iowa City, but also out in the unincorporated areas where we're seeing hundreds and hundreds of acres developed for residential development. How does the issue of community sustainability, how is that impacted by urban sprawl or the inefficient use of our land?
Well, it seems to me that in this country, we've always had a mentality that land is cheap. There's always been some land somewhere that could be used if we weren't satisfied with where we were. We've always been a very mobile society. And the reality is that we're starting to get to the point where there's a land crunch, and we haven't realized that yet. And because of the perception that land is cheap and available, we have not forced ourselves to develop the kinds of settlements and communities that really focus on bringing people together, on diminishing isolation, and really providing stable centers of residential development and commercial development. And that's this is a very complicated issue to talk about because it's something that we don't often think about, we don't often see. But I have a little flyer here. Well, not a flyer; it's actually a menu from Applebee's restaurant. And I think even though the store that the restaurant that I picked this up at has a big parking lot in front of them, I think Applebee's realizes what appeals to people, what kinds of development really help nurture the human spirit and help avoid the isolation that is becoming very rampant in our society. You see here, you've got a sidewalk with a park bench on it. You've got a bicyclist in the street. You've got a smaller street. You've got woods and fields and mountains, in this case, behind the store. It's got everything that people really want in community, but unfortunately, we're not building that, and we're not allowing our statutes and incentives aren't currently providing that kind of development.
I see. So how aware do you think the average Iowan is about not only the sustainability issue, but the economic issues associated with growth? Is there a lot of education to happen on this set of issues?
There is, and largely because it's so complicated. I mean, there's so many things here that you don't really have time to think about, and connections you don't generally make unless you really sit down and start looking at them. And I look around my community in Des Moines, and I see that we've lost a lot of commercial development in our neighborhood. People a lot of them who don't have cars. I live in a fairly poor neighborhood. People who don't have cars are being forced to do more shopping at convenience stores that have a very high markup. They have less opportunity for social interaction that restaurants and other types of commercial ventures provide. And I think, you know, that whole trend is encouraging isolation. It's decreasing community. It's hard to measure this stuff, but I think people eventually will get more frustrated. We're going to see crime continue to rise. Again, I'm not saying this is the sole cause of crime, but I think it has an element. It's part of the picture. As we develop in ways that don't encourage interaction, people feel less inclined to work with each other, to cooperate with each other, and to get along.
Sure. You're watching Iowa News and Views. Our guest is Ed Fallon. We're talking about urban growth issues. We're in downtown Iowa City this afternoon on the infamous Ped Mall. Very beautiful spot on a warm July afternoon. One of the issues, Ed, that the legislature took up this last legislative session was this resolution that you spearheaded, and others in Johnson County, Representative Mary Masher and Representative Dick Myers were also sponsors of this legislation, to establish a statewide study, essentially, of land use questions, urban sprawl, farmland protection, and sustainability. What's going on there, and when is this effort going to get underway?
Well, as an example of just how complicated and controversial this issue is, it took a lot of effort to get that passed. It was pretty much my dominant focus this legislative session. But I'm delighted that we were able to get it passed, and it establishes a very interesting proposition. We have a very diverse commission composed of 21 people from a whole range of groups that are going to be meeting over the course of the next year and a half and examining trends in farmland, trends in population, problems relating to urban areas, and examining the effect of our current planning statutes on those issues. And at the end of that time, and there will be, by the way, plenty of opportunity for citizen input, at the end of 18 months, and in December of '98, there will be an effort to put together some recommendations so that the Iowa General Assembly can hopefully have a set of guidelines to consider drafting legislation that will have an impact on urban sprawl.
That's good. One of the issues that we see in our own county is the whole question of regional planning. Johnson County's right now is conducting a update of its comprehensive plan. Iowa City's doing the same. We have North Liberty working on a plan. A number of our other smaller communities, Coralville, and everybody has their own vision about where they would like to go. And it seems to me one area that we need some help in is trying to encourage a more regional perspective, at least on a series of goals that we'd all agree on, particularly in the area of farmland protection, but sustainability of services. I mean, as local government, being county supervisor, we provide services, and it isn't providing services to residential developments out in unincorporated areas sometimes costs more money than we get in. There's certainly been a number of studies, we haven't done one here, but there's a number of studies that indicate that. But developing some process of regionalization, that there's some goals, but there's local decision making about how one implements those goals. Do you think that might be something that could come forward through the study?
Yeah, it's too early to tell what might come out of this effort, but I think it's safe to say that if we're going to get anywhere, there are going to have to be some some changes in state laws that provide the right kind of incentive to development, and probably also providing some disincentives, and perhaps some general guidelines, some general principles that local governments ought to consider when they do their planning. But I think it's very clear that that the mood of the legislature is such that we will preserve local authority. There needs to be a strong commitment for local governments to invest in the planning process themselves. But as in the example you gave, there are, well, I don't know how many different communities in Iowa City that are in Johnson County that are drafting plans. In Polk County, we've got about 17 different municipal plans. And some of them are in direct conflict. Some of them result in some very ugly, heated, and unnecessary annexation battles. And in some cases, you're going to have some authority saying, okay, these are the general principles that guide local governments so they can get to a point where they can work together and not be in conflict. The less of that happens, the better. But I think realistically, since interests are often coming into dispute, some of that is going to be necessary.
When I think of this issue, sometimes I think about what's the take on it for the average taxpayer in terms of trying to educate folks about it, in that there are costs to this kind of unplanned, uncontrolled, sprawling growth. It costs us more, local governments, to provide things like transportation, emergency services, a variety of public safety services than growth that is more condensed, growth that conserves land, growth that's contiguous to cities and infill in cities. And I think the one education piece that's out there is trying to define what some of those fiscal impacts are. We tend to believe that all growth, no matter what it is just plain old good and pays for itself. And the studies that have been done in other states seem to indicate contrary.
Yes. Yeah. No. The studies all around the country, in fact, have shown that residential development doesn't pay for itself. Think about it. You've got 160 acres of farmland. The farmer who owns that land pays a lot more in taxes than he uses. He doesn't have, he maybe has 2 kids on that farm. Perhaps the family occasionally has need for police or fire protection, but if you subdivide that 160 acres and put, say, 160 homes on there, you've got a whole bunch of kids that go to school. You've got a whole bunch of demand on your police and fire protection. You've got a much greater level of wear and tear on your roads. Just overall, you've got a lot more impact on the system. And studies have shown that residential development does not pay its own way. And the difference can be as low as 2 cents more per dollar, but in some situations we're looking at 60 cents more per dollar. And so people need to realize that and say, is that really an investment that we want to or can even afford to make?
One of the points that also probably needs to be made is how a lot of growth that occurs anymore is related to our mobility, in that we all have cars, virtually. Not everybody has cars, but that shopping centers out at the edge of town are pretty much commonplace, and how some consideration of energy impacts really need to be part of our planning process.
Something to think about for the future too is that every one of us is a potential non-driver. At some point in our lives, we're not going to be able to drive, whether we're senior citizens. At some point as a senior citizen, you often get to the point where you just cannot drive. I have a 91-year-old grandmother-in-law who is in that position. and you may have an accident, be incapacitated in some way that would make you incapable of driving. And yet almost all of our transportation subsidies are going toward the construction of roads. The average cost of a car to you personally is $6,000 a year. The public cost to support that car that you don't even see or think about are $3,000 to $5,000 in terms of road maintenance and plowing and all the other parking lots, everything else. So at some point I think we have to say as a society, is this a transportation infrastructure that we want to support the way we are right now? Do we want to make our structure, our system so focused on automobiles that we exclude options for mass transit, for trains, for buses, bikes, whatever, things that other people can and would use if the support systems were in place? And I think the other reality is too, a lot of errands that people used to do by foot, walking to buy a loaf of bread, to get a newspaper, going out to a movie, whatever, those are now done by cars, because especially in a lot of the modern subdivisions, there's no other way you can do it. There's no sidewalks, you're nowhere near any commercial development. You know, the old situation where you had residential development on the bottom and some commercial development on the bottom and some apartments 1, 2, and 3 floors up, that's not being built anymore.
Sure.
And that encourages less dependence on the automobile. And again, I'm not saying that automobiles don't have their place, but we need to have some balance here so that we, as you said, save fuel and also encourage more interaction. I think, again, we're talking about the community involvement here, and also provide for options for people who can't drive or don't want to drive.
Very good. Ed, what if you were to talk to somebody in Davenport or Dubuque or Des Moines, how can they become involved in these issues in their local communities?
Well, the issue is fortunately beginning to get more and more attention in the local press and in the national press too. And so I think people just should begin to be sensitive to where and when those articles are appearing and taking the time to read them and try to understand the issue. I've heard a lot of talk about conferences. There's been several this summer. There's probably a bunch more planned. I know Des Moines is planning one. There are some nonprofit groups that are beginning to organize. So there's all sorts of options for people to get involved, even if it's just at the level of educating themselves, because that's an important and really one of the most critically important elements of this battle. People need to understand the issue and all its ramifications. They need to understand the transportation aspect. They need to understand the impact on farmland. They need to understand the impact on the quality of life in an urban community, and the impact on community itself, on how people interact and how development encourages or discourages interaction. And just educating yourself is key, but if you want to go the next step, I know there are groups, I know of one in Des Moines at any rate, that are looking for people to be involved.
That's great. Another way I can think of in terms of a kind of local government is for people to get involved on their planning and zoning commission, certainly get in touch with their local government about what plan exists and when it's going to be updated, and participate in that process would be a very helpful way to be involved. We're visiting with State Representative Ed Fallon from Des Moines, and I think it'd be a nice time to hear maybe another song as we wrap things up here. Do you have any final comments to make, Ed, about where we need to be here?
You know, I've been involved with a lot of issues in my adult life, and certainly as a legislator. And I guess of all the issues I've been involved with, I think this one touches on more themes, more important themes than probably anything else. It really hits at elements that everybody needs to be concerned about. And if we don't get a handle on the current development practices and make appropriate modifications, we're going to see problems down the road that we're not going to be able to address effectively. Sure. Now's the time to address some of these problems.
On top of it.
Yeah.
Good. Well, Ed, I appreciate you coming on. I'm going to take your mic from you, and so we don't blast our sound guy.
That's right. Accordions can do that.
We'll hear a song, and then we'll come back and wrap it up. What are we going to hear this time?
Well, I suppose something Irish might be appropriate.
That would be
seeing
wonderful.
My last name is Fallon.
Little Irish tune from Ed. I'd like to let you know I'm half Irish. My mother's an O'Brien, and we've been doing the Irish thing too.
We've even attracted some kids.
We've got a little audience right now. We've been talking about urban growth issues in Iowa with State Representative Ed Fallon, who's been providing some significant leadership in our state on this issue and was successful in convincing his colleagues in the Iowa legislature to move ahead and try and address this on a statewide level. We're looking forward to see the progress of the study commission, and we appreciate you being on, and we'll have you back to learn more about the progress that's made.
Thank you.
Very good. You've been watching Iowa News and Views. My name's Joe Balcom. We'll give you a little bit of information here in a second about how to contact Ed and how to send us ideas for future shows and future guests. I'd like to thank Derek Maurer for camera work today. We're outside downtown Iowa City on a beautiful July afternoon. We'll see you again. Thanks. Thought we were gone, we're back. We had an opportunity a week ago to interview Ed Fallon. He was in Des Moines to make a presentation on urban growth issues. We did an interview with him in downtown Iowa City, and we're pleased to have done that. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about some upcoming shows that we're going to do, but before I do, I'd like to tell you a little bit about Iowa News and Views. We're a public access television program that's being distributed around the state of Iowa. The program is produced all by volunteers. The content that we've provided, this is our 13th show, is generally focused on issues of state and community interest from a progressive perspective. We have a perspective that we'd like to put forward, and we do that through the guests that come on and the topics that we address. We're interested in what you think of our show, and in a little bit I'm going to tell you how to get a hold of us to send us your ideas. Some ideas for some upcoming shows include doing some presentations on the following issues. One is some of the issues dealing with the Mississippi River, including blufflands protection and water quality and a variety of use issues along the Mississippi River. Another issue that we're looking at taking on is the whole question of prison building in our state and some of the implications of that as we look at various public policies to address crime. In addition, we're interested in bringing you some information on Green Party politics in Iowa, specifically what's going on with the Green movement as a third political party in our state. And we have been discussing trying to put together actually a series of programs on agriculture, specifically dealing with pork production in Iowa. And so those are some ideas that we have. We're interested in your ideas, and again, in a minute, we'll tell you how to get a hold of us. As I mentioned a moment ago, Iowa News and Views is produced by volunteers. We've produced 13 shows over the last 26 weeks, mostly from the public access studios in Iowa City, where we have a facility where we can come in and for free, essentially, produce a program using the equipment in the facilities here. And we're very pleased to be able to do that and are very thankful to Public Access TV in Iowa City for that opportunity. Because we have a few extra minutes tonight, I'd like to introduce the crew that's been here every other week producing a show. And back in the booth, I'd like to introduce Doug Allaire on the mixer and directing. Nathan Shepard is also back there and producing direction as well. And Chris Randall, see Chris back there, little wave, there she is, doing graphics and helping out in every way to make sure that we get good sound and good picture quality. On camera, we have Derek Maurer, and we're going to try and swing around and get a shot of Derek, getting a shot of the crew in the back. Derek is doing all our publicity and camera work. We promote the show on a regular basis with press releases to all the various media around the state, and Derek's taking care of that. And finally, we have Linda Nelson, also on camera. Linda doing camera work each and every week, working hard, helping us make it. She also has shot a lot of photographs that are available or soon to be available on our web page. That's the crew. There's a few other people that aren't here that help out. Steve Holmes is also involved, and who am I missing? Am I missing anybody? There are a number of other people you'll see in the credits that help out, but we want to really say thanks to Public Access TV for their support and let you know that we would be able to do it without the public access movement. There's public access stations. If you're watching this around the state, if you're in Des Moines, you're seeing it on TCI. TCI brings it to us in a number of communities that we provide the show, and we're also happy to be on there. In most of the communities that the show's provided, we have local sponsors. I'd like to again thank them for their support in making it possible for you to see this show. In addition, I'd like to thank our contributors. We are, as I noted, in all volunteer production. We're looking for ideas for shows, so feel free to send those to us. We'll give you our web page and our email address and our phone number and our address shortly here. You can send us your information about guests and possible content for shows. We'd love to see it. Finally, as you know, this is just TV. We do a show every other week. We're on every week. What's important is what you're doing in your local community each and every day to make it a better place to live. Thanks for joining us. Send us your ideas.